Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the New Americans Task Force March webinar hosted by the Utah Center for Global Talent at the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and the Center for Economic Opportunity and Belonging. My name is Claudia Gutierrez Sanchez and I'm serving as the Interim Director for the Utah Center for Global Talent. Today's agenda, we'll start off with opening remarks from Pete Codella, Managing Director of Business Services at the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. Following Pete's remarks, I will share community announcements that we have for you today, and then we will turn the time over to our guest presenters representing the Salt Lake Chamber and Voices for Utah Children, who will each present an overview of key bills from the 2025 legislative session and discuss potential implications for Utah's businesses and our New American community. Following our guest presenters, Z from the Center for Economic Opportunity and Belonging will lead a discussion, answer your questions, and provide closing remarks. We hope today's webinar will provide you with an insight into the legislative process and provide you guidance to help you navigate upcoming changes. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pete.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is an interesting time of year when we kind of regroup after the legislative session here in Utah. Some good things came out of the session, some things that we're all wondering how they'll turn out came out of the session, kind of like every year. But we appreciate your interest. We appreciate those who are going to participate in the webinar today. Thank you for the work that you all do to help Utah's economy continue to get really high marks and top rankings. Just some new ones that came out, the least expensive place to start a new business. We just get great accolades for our whole ecosystem, for our whole community, and we're thankful for everyone's contributions. The governor's often said, the difference, what makes Utah different are its people, and that's so true. So we appreciate the spirit of collaboration and being open and being willing to help and mentor and uplift those around us. So just thanks for being here, and please continue to reach out to Claudia or Z to continue this good and important work. So Claudia or Z.
Thank you, Pete. So to start off today's community announcements, we have the business talk with business, AI-powered strategies for business tomorrow's hosted by the Westminster University. Again, this is tomorrow. It's going to go from 10 a.m. to 4:30. So if you're interested and haven't already registered and interested in this event, we will share the link to all these events in the chat. So if you don't have time to scan the QR code or don't have that ability to right now, we'll share that in the chat and then you can register. The next community announcement that we have is a college and career and community night, a free event being hosted at Granite Peaks Adult Education. This will be April 3rd from 4 to 7 p.m. If you're interested in tabling, your organization's interested in tabling at this event to share resources or information, you can contact Sherry Mortensen at Granite School District to reserve a table. The next event that we wanted to share is the Law and Policy Series hosted by the University of Utah's Dream Center. The next event of these series is going to take place on Monday, April 7th. It is a hybrid event, so if you can't attend in person, there is the option to participate virtually. For this upcoming session, it'll be exploring immigration through victim-based relief, the U-Visa and VAWA. And that will be presented by staff from the Holy Cross Ministries. And so if that's something, if you serve community members or if you yourself would like information, there's the registration link. And again, we'll share the event link in the chat. Next community event is we have our upcoming, our next online information session for citizenship presented through the Utah Citizenship Initiative. Holy Cross Ministries team will be presenting in this information session on Saturday, April 12th. This will be a 9 a.m. session in English, followed by the same information presented in Spanish. So if you have questions about the citizenship application process, would like to know the benefits of becoming the U.S. citizen, and the eligibility requirements, but also want to ask one of the immigration attorneys questions about eligibility or applying for citizenship, this would be the opportunity to do that. Next, we have the Getting Started Business Idea Challenge. This is hosted by the Startup State here at the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. So every third Wednesday of the month, they host these business idea challenges where you present your idea for starting or advancing a business, and you can win up to $500 at each of these monthly events. So I encourage you to, if you have ideas and want to get started, to participate in these business idea challenges, or if you'd like more information on starting a business, expanding your business, buying or selling a business, or just receiving more resources and information to help you grow your business, visit startup.utah.gov for all those resources and information. The other thing about that site is also that you have the ability to change the information to various languages. So if English is not your first language or you're learning English, you can still change the language and learn about these information and resources in a primary language. Okay, and last we have the Junior Business Summit. This is being hosted by the Mill, the Utah Pacific Islander Chamber of Commerce, and the Pacific Unity Association at Salt Lake Community College. This is a business summit for high school and college students to explore the exciting world of business. It's free and lunch is provided, but registration is required. And so that's another great event coming up here in April. Okay, so those are today's announcements that we have. So now I'll turn the time over to our first presenters, Liliana and Syriac from Voices for Utah Children. And just a reminder during these presentations, please submit your questions through the questions and answers, the Q&A option up on your screen. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Syriac and Liliana. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Claudia mentioned, we are policy analysts at Voices for Utah Children. My name is Liliana Bolaños, and I'm an immigrant rights policy analyst. And I will let my colleague Syriac introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Syriac Alvarez Valle, and I'm a senior policy analyst at Voices for Utah Children, working with Lily on our immigration policies and then also our healthcare policies. Next slide, please.
Perfect. Today we're going to talk about some immigration-related bills that passed up at the Utah State Legislature. There is some overlap with some of the other presenters, so we won't dive into all of them in detail just for the sake of time. Excuse me. The first one we want to talk about today is we're going to go through the House bills first. The first one is HB 42, English Learner Amendments by Representative Perucci and Senator Baldry. This bill actually passed and was signed by the governor this week. This bill provides increased funding, $500,000 a year for English learner programs in the state. And as you can see here, we've summarized a few of the qualifications. The school district needs to see an enrollment increase of 75% over a 3-year span, and need to prove substantial need and demonstrate a lack of funding. At Voices for Utah Children, we did support this bill because we understand that there is an overall need for additional funding in schools across the state. And we were very supportive and excited to see that it had passed and is now signed by the governor. So this was a bill that we were tracking this year that we were very happy about.
The second bill that we were tracking and wanted to talk about today is HB 178, Non-Citizen Health Insurance Policy Amendments from Representative Walter. This bill would have repealed the state CHIP program that has allowed more immigrant children to access health care in our state, and it provides essential health care services such as preventative care and ensures that kids get the proper care that they need when it comes to vaccines, and ensuring that they get chronic disease management care as well. And this bill would have repealed that program. Fortunately, though, we were able to stop this bill. This bill was never heard in committee. It was held in the Rules Committee during the whole legislative session. And just for data purposes, we know that research shows that uncompensated care cost the state around $8.8 million in Utah annually. And so we know that this bill in this program saves money. And so that's why we opposed HB 178. And again, it did not pass. And we're thankful to all of our partners. We had over 35 organizations and entities in support of state CHIP that really showed how much support that we had, and how well this program is already working. And so it did not pass, it failed, and we are very glad about that.
And then the next bill that we'll briefly touch on, because our understanding is that Mary Catherine will be able to dive a little bit more into this, is HB 214, Employer Verification Amendments by Representative Walter. This is a bill that would have required Utah businesses with 5 employees or more to verify their workers' legal status. Currently, only businesses with over 150 employees must comply. And the agriculture, construction, and business groups spoke in strong opposition to this bill. This was a bill that we did oppose simply because there hasn't been immigration reform passed federally. Therefore, that lack of access to legal pathways and work permits, combined with an E-Verify enforcement bill, would just further make it challenging for immigrant families to provide for their families. And so we opposed for this reason and the threat that it brought to immigrant families and children living in mixed status families. Luckily, this bill did fail in committee, and Mary Catherine will be able to touch a little bit more on this when she presents.
Next slide, please. HB 226, criminal amendments, is another bill that we opposed. This bill would have impacted, or will impact, both legal and undocumented immigrants who are going through the criminal justice system. It originally would have reversed the 364-day rule that triggers automatic deportation under federal law. And now this bill, after its 4th substitute, that pass, only reverses that rule for certain violent crimes. And we still have concerns about the impact to legal immigrants, including refugees. However, we do know that this bill is in a better place that it started, because in addition to the criminal amendments that it included, it also included a portion on nonprofits that would have impacted nonprofits here in Utah who transport undocumented immigrants. And the language of the bill was very broad and could have been interpreted in a lot of ways. And so we're thankful that in the 4th substitute, the bill that actually passed did not include that, and the pieces that were included in the 364-day reversal only included Class A misdemeanor crimes that are offenses against individuals, except for a couple of things such as propelling bodily substances or materials, prohibition of hazing, things that, probably shouldn't be deportable offenses. And so the other piece that we are worried about is just the ask for judges to consider undocumented immigrants as high flight risk when they set bail, and also ask jails to create policies to confirm everyone's immigration status. We know that immigration status is complicated, and having our state and local law enforcement really be in charge of that isn't the best use of our time. And so while we know that this bill is in a better place where it passed, we are still opposed to the bill.
The next bill that we wanted to highlight was HB 284, International Money Transmission Amendments by Representative Gregis. This is a bill that would have proposed a 2% tax on international money transfers for those without a valid government ID. And for example, this would have impacted individuals that only have a foreign passport or a driving privilege card as ID. And so this was something that specifically only affect community that lacked proof of any sort of immigration status for whatever reason. Again, it is important to note that our immigration system is very complex and that there are many individuals in this country without a pathway to a legal status or work permit. And so this would negatively impact a lot of those individuals. Although it did end up passing in committee and on the House floor, they ran out of time on the final day of session. For those that don't know, they were voting up until midnight that Friday, final day of session, and they simply ran out of time before they could get to this bill, which is why there was no vote on this bill in the end.
Awesome. And then the next bill, HB 392, unlicensed driver amendments. This bill would have increased the penalty for driving without a license from an infraction to a Class C misdemeanor, and would have allowed law enforcement to impound a vehicle for the individuals and then fingerprint someone if there was no way to verify their identification. Our biggest worry was a driving privilege card holder, or those who have been unable to get a driving privilege card would be impacted. And this is because on the test for a driving privilege card can only be taken in English. And these increased penalties for them would result in just more criminalization of these individuals, and again, not providing them an opportunity for them to actually pass the test. So we know a number of individuals in the community who have been unable to get their driving privilege card simply because the test can only be taken in English. And so we did oppose this bill. It failed in the Senate second reading calendar, 12 to 17, and we are glad that it failed because, again, it would just increase penalties without allowing people to actually take the test. And while it wasn't the full central point of this bill, we know that those people would be impacted. Anything else, Lily?
Nope, that was great.
Awesome. Next slide, please. And now we're going to go through the Senate bills.
Perfect. Thank you. The first Senate bill, we're only going to highlight two. The first one is SB 31, Refugee Services Amendments by Senator Winterton. Another bill that we supported this session. This is a bill that codifies the Refugee Services Office into law by establishing it within the Department of Workforce Services. This is a great bill because it protects this office and enforces our values as a state to continue to serve the refugees that come and settle in our state. Luckily, this bill did pass, which is a win for our immigrant community, especially for our refugee friends.
And then the last bill that we wanted to talk about is SB 90, mandatory jail sentence from Senator Musselman. This bill is one that started off really bad, and we did start off in opposition because it would have added an enhancement to an individual who was undocumented and had committed a crime. So just because they were undocumented, there would have been an enhancement. However, the bill was changed and was combined with HB 211, enhanced penalties following unlawful reentry amendments. And now what this bill would do is add a mandatory jail sentence for individuals who have been convicted of reentry after removal or deportation, have been convicted of a prior criminal violation, and are charged with an additional crime. And so the mandatory jail sentences are for felonies, for Class B misdemeanors, Class A misdemeanors, and Class C misdemeanors. So someone would have to go through the jail system and spend that much time in jails, 360 days, 180 days, or 90 days, depending on the violation or the crime that they are charged with because of this. So again, it started off really bad, but it now only will impact those who have been convicted of reentry after removal or deportation. Awesome. Well, those are all the bills that we had that we tracked this legislative session. We are, just a plug for the Voices team, we are going to be releasing a legislative recap for all the bills that we tracked as a team that impact children and families. So please keep an eye out on that. And with that, we'll pass it back to you all, or I think to, yeah, Mary Catherine to give the other legislative overview.
Hey, thank you. Claudia, do you want me to just go ahead then?
Go ahead and get started.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Mary Catherine Perry. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs for the Salt Lake Chamber. We are a statewide chamber that includes many members of our community across the state. So businesses, colleges, universities, nonprofits. We are a collection, a community. We're a nonprofit association of members. And as such, we have three really main goals. One is to advocate for policy for our members, but also for the business community at large, and also to help build business within the state of Utah. And then to create community within those businesses across the state. So opportunities to network, to learn from one another, to help share kind of what our legislative priorities are across the state. And then I am the one that's primarily charged with being on the Hill through the session and advocating for those policies. So this year we had about 11 legislative priorities that ranged from public safety to affordable housing to energy to tax and regulatory environments. We advocated for a lot of different things. Our chamber was tracking over 200 bills. And as you know, we had, I think, over 1,000 bills that were numbered, and then close to, around 900 passing. It was a lot of bills, and a lot of those bills had multiple substitutes. So, I know that you all know this, but it was just a lot to track, a lot to keep track of, and to understand. So I just want to go through some of the bills that we tracked, ones that matter to businesses, but to just kind of to help Utah's quality of life in general, and also to new Americans as well. And as Liliana and Syriac mentioned, there were a few that they talked about that I wanted to touch on as well. So I'll go to the next slide. So economic development and business environment, we wanted to make sure that we did not, that we helped to keep a watch out for policies that would have increased business regulation and detract from our pro-business environment, and make sure that the chamber and other people that were involved that this would have impacted had a voice at the table. So there were two bills that we were tracking. The first one, House Bill 214, Employer Verification Amendments. We spoke with some serious concerns about this at the first committee hearing, and I saw Liliana and Syriac there as well. It was a very broad group of people who had concerns about this from many perspectives. As they mentioned, this would have taken the number of businesses that had to comply with e-verification of their employees and included almost every single business in Utah. So any business with 5 or more employees, even if that business didn't have a human resources person, even if that business had seasonal workers, even if that business wasn't familiar with this program, we believe in legal immigration, but we also want more pathways to legal immigration here in Utah. And it was very interesting to hear the members of the committee talk about their concerns with this bill. It became clear that the bill sponsor hadn't talked to a lot of the associations that were there, to the chamber, to other interested parties. And so the committee voted to hold the bill and encouraged him to reach out to the communities that were there and kind of get some feedback on that. He believed he had the votes to bring it back to committee again. So there was a second hearing where there were people who also voiced concerns about this as well. And the committee once again held the bill. So in my opinion, this felt like an example where that committee process really worked, where committee members said, we don't think this is ready to go to the full house. We have concerns. We don't feel like our questions are being answered. And so we're not gonna let this bill go forward. So that bill did not pass. The other one, House Bill 284, International Money Transmission Amendments. I was following this one. We had this, again, as was mentioned, would have added a 2% fee on top of international money transfers if the person did not have an ID with them, and it has to be certain kinds of IDs. They did mention in committee, the sponsor said that if you didn't have your ID with you, you could file on your taxes for a tax credit to recover that fee. Somebody else who testified said, you know what, almost no one recovers that fee ever. So you have to be filing your taxes to recover it. You need to know how. We all know that filing taxes is a very complex system. So it did pass out of committee. It did pass the House of Representatives along party lines, but it's interesting what happened once it got to the Senate. It was sent to a Senate committee, but it never had a hearing. And there were multiple opportunities that it could have, but it wasn't put on an agenda. And then on the last night of the session, the last day of the session, it was put on the board. And in my experience, the Senate and the House will pass what they want to pass. And so my read was at 11 p.m. on the last night of the session, this bill was circled or paused. And so it felt to me like the Senate was saying, we're not going to pass this bill. So I believe they could have made the time for it, but my read is that they chose not to. And so that bill did not pass either. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Some of these just kind of touch on business, but also workforce and education. House Bill 106, the income tax revision, this actually wound up putting in a couple bills into one. And one thing that this one did have was the child tax credit expansion. So for children 6 and under, the tax credit is there that you can claim, but also gave a tax credit to businesses that provide childcare. And that was something that we felt strongly about too. So we're hopeful and anxious that the childcare crisis that many of us are facing and struggling with, that this will help encourage businesses to offer more childcare either on site or close by so that their employees can have a place to have their children cared for in a high quality environment that's close by. House Bill, and that bill did pass, and all three of these did. House Bill 447 was really Speaker Schultz's kind of centerpiece of what he wanted to pass this session. It was very interesting. What he got was a one-time $65 million grant for essentially high schools to help offer CTE classes or training for children and high school students so that when they graduate high school, they're ready to work the next day. So this could be things like construction. It could be culinary, like food prep. It could be, I've toured this Catalyst Center in Davis, and it's really incredible the things that they're doing there to prepare kids to be ready to work the minute they're done with high school. It was interesting talking to the principal of this high school in Davis. He said, we could do cosmetology, we could do hair and skin and fill those classes up really fast. But the thing we want to do, we decided not to do those classes. We want ones that are going to give these kids opportunities for high demand, high paying jobs when they're done. So this grant will help to build more of these centers across the state, and it kind of gives businesses too. Boeing is partnering with these schools to offer, aeronautics and flight simulators so that they can learn to work there and kind of create pathways for kids who aren't ready maybe yet or aren't interested in going to a 4-year university or college. This gives them a pathway from high school into a good paying job immediately afterwards. Another one was this Talent Connect bill by Senator Milner, which is kind of a portal for now students who've been in higher education in a college and in a university looking for a kind of a job match so that the business demand is meeting what those colleges and universities can offer, and making sure that we're aligning our training with what the businesses want. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Affordable housing, as we know, is a problem. We have a supply and demand gap where we are not able to meet the supply of affordable housing for enough of our Utah families and individuals. So there were 3 bills that we were really looking at. Utah Housing Amendments, HB 37 requires the state to create an affordable housing plan. House Bill 368, local land use amendments, looked to streamline kind of a lot of the delays with housing seem to be with getting approvals and permitting for developers who want to build homes. So this was aimed to kind of speed up that process. And then SB 181, housing affordability amendments, looked to kind of find creative ideas where developers said, what if we don't build the garage at the same time as we do the house? What if we don't require all of the parking, or, we don't require super long, driveways? Or how can we be creative about building homes at an affordable price? I'll tell you, we bought our first home in Salt Lake City, and it had a detached garage, but the garage really wasn't a garage. We couldn't park a car in it. It was a very old home. So I know that it's possible to get by without a required garage on homes. You can do it. And so we need to give people options to just get into a home and get what they need in the home, but maybe delay some of those other development pieces on it. The next slide is public safety and homelessness. The HB 329, we know that public safety and homelessness is a problem. It's a statewide issue, and we don't want to simply increase enforcement without increasing services. So we want to make sure that both sides of those equations have everything we've got to make sure that people who are struggling with addiction and mental health problems, or just with a place to live, that those services are in place, while also making sure that we understand that helping people move off the streets and out of encampments is probably the safest thing for them, and having a place for them to go. So HB 329, Homeless Services Amendments, and HB 167 help to provide those services, those supports, to make sure that people who are either in need services because they are homeless or have been incarcerated, so they've been involved in the justice system, are able to receive kind of a bridge over into reintegration into society and into Utah, to make sure that the investment that we've had with them and the treatment is successful. And all of these passed. We're so thrilled about that. Okay, and the next slide. The reason I bring up energy, which feels like to me something I didn't fully understand for a lot of my life and why it was important, but it has become very important to Utah and to Utah businesses, because we are facing a shortage of energy and long waits for people who need large amounts of energy. The one thing that I think that was probably the best thing that came out of these bills that were passed by the legislature is that our legislative leaders said, if we're going to allow these customers to come in and use large amounts of energy, we need to make sure that there's a wall between the price that they pay and the price that everyday people who just need to turn on their lights and turn on the heat or the air conditioning, the rates that they pay. So the state, I feel like, was able to honor that commitment to make sure that you and I aren't paying increased prices for these companies and like data centers and things like that that are coming in and need large amounts of energy, because that is an option, that if they need large amounts of energy, that we all pay for that. But I believe our state had a win in making sure that that everyday people didn't see an alarming or even really significant increases in the rates of power that we pay. We instead are going to make sure that the large load customers pay for the energy that they need. And then the next slide. I just wanted to give a quick summary of some of the really significant things that came out of the state budget this year. So for the entire state of Utah for next year, the legislature budgeted $30.8 billion. And here were some important things. So first of all, they gave the one-time income tax rate and reduced income taxes. Now, where people are on that is, sometimes I say, well, I'd give up my $20 if we could increase services for people, but other people are like, I want that $20 back. But they did cut income tax rates for individuals. They also, again, as I mentioned, $2 million tax credit for childcare centers, $4.1 million for expanding the child tax credit. With public education, Syriac and Liliana talked about the support, the $500,000 ongoing for schools have an increase in enrollment of students learning English. Also, as I mentioned, that $65 million for those high schools that will help train kids to be job ready when they graduate. There was a $20 million appropriation for the first time home buyer program. And then with homelessness, $1.9 million ongoing for family shelter and $5.5 million to support emergency winter and, that should have said summer response throughout the state. So again, we saw, appropriations for things that will matter to a lot of the quality of life, things that we all experience, but also a lot of vulnerable and high need populations as well. And that, I believe, is it for me. I think that's my last slide. Perfect. Thank you all for your engagement and your support during this session.
Thank you so much, Mary Catherine. That was amazing. And as I alluded to earlier, the legislative session is always sometimes very overwhelming with so many bills introduced and so many iterations of it. So we really appreciate both Mary Catherine from the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, as well as Liliana and Syriac from Voices for Utah Children to provide us with this really great overview of bills that would impact the new American population in Utah. I know that we are in a period of time where there's a lot of transitioning happening. There is a lot of changes happening throughout. So it's good to hear that although there were some bills that might be harmful that was introduced earlier in the year, that those bills did not get passed. So we're very glad for that, but also knowing that there is investment that is happening in the state to support new Americans. And specifically for the New American Task Force, we really want to make sure that the new American populations is contributing to growth, Utah's strong economy, seeing the investment in the trade schools is something that I think will really impact the work that we're doing. So with that, thank you so much again. I would like to open the webinar up to anyone who might have some questions for our speakers today. Feel free to unmute yourself or type your questions in the chat or on the question and answer feature on Zoom. While people are thinking, I do have a couple of questions for speakers, if that's okay, to get us started with the conversation. I'm going to start with the English learners investment. I understand that many of the dollars is only going to schools that have a higher impact on students. Syriac, Liliana, or Mary Catherine, how can community members understand what school those dollars are going into? How is it supporting the community they're serving right now? would you be able, and I know we're still in the early stages and we might not, but I think it's important for communities to know how those investment impact their communities.
Yes, thank you, Z. Yes, that's a great question. First of all, we do want to acknowledge that this 75% increase in English language learners over the span of 3 years is nearly impossible for some school districts to reach, especially school districts that have historically seen a higher number of English learners. For example, Salt Lake City School District, Ogden School District. These two districts have historically had a high number of English learners, so it will be nearly impossible for them to reach this 75% threshold, therefore excluding them from receiving this funding. I also want to acknowledge that they are giving the school districts freedom with deciding how to use this funding best for their English learner programs. One way that school districts have mentioned they plan to use this funding is by paying for their teachers to get an English learner endorsement. They receive training that prepares them to better teach the children in their classes that speak a language other than English as their first language. So again, we have met with many of these school districts to talk about how they will use this funding, and they are prepared and have done the work to know how to best use this funding. So those are two things I would mention. Syriac, Mary Catherine, would you like to include anything else?
I'm glad, Liliana, that you talked about the funding. That is the part that I'm not as familiar with. The part that I am familiar with were some of the discussions prior to this bill being released. And I think that is not to be minimized, because some of the ideas that I heard floating around from members of the legislature who were concerned about the increases in the number of English learner students were ideas like maybe we should cap the number of students at each high school that would fit that description. Maybe we turn them away and they've got to go to different schools. And that actually worried me so much. And it didn't seem like that would be legal or possible. But I was very relieved to see that this bill took on a more positive direction in terms of allowing the funding and support that the schools need. And when I heard, I think it might have been in November, or maybe it actually was during the interim, to listen to the principals and the superintendents who are working nonstop to make sure that their teachers are supported, the students are supported, and the families are supported. It really just was incredible and really moving to hear the sacrifices that they're making to make sure that their community felt unified and supported. So I was really happy to see how this turned out. In the end, although I will say my children are in the Salt Lake City School District, I would love to see supports for schools who are already at a certain threshold, because I think they need them too, as you mentioned. But anyway, that was just my insight on how this came out.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that your comment really is a great segue to the question that we have for you. I think one of the successes that we have seen this legislative session is really engaging communities. I attended some of the committee meetings that many of you attended, especially for the English learners, and just hearing community members, including principals and local school district leaders coming in and say, we care about children. We care about how they're performing in the schools. When they are in the schools, we don't, we want them to succeed. And it was so heart-wrenching to hear that engagement from communities. So to the question on the chat, how can small businesses prepare for next year's legislative session so we don't get caught off guard when bills like HB 214 gets presented with little or no notice that will negatively impact small businesses?
That is an excellent question. And if I could explain how all of us could not be caught off guard, I think I would be a millionaire. There are definitely associations that you can belong to. You can, there are sometimes umbrella organizations that also watch out for those things. But that was actually one of my concerns, is that small businesses are often not represented on the Hill because they've got their heads down. They're working hard. They're just trying to make it day to day to day. And watching and following the legislative session can be confusing and time consuming and a lot of those things. We sometimes survey as a chamber, and I will say at least 60% of our membership is small businesses. People sometimes think it's all big businesses, but we have a lot of small to medium-sized businesses here in Utah and as part of these associations. But Syriac and Liliana might have more feedback on that too, but just following any group or organization that's also watching out for this, keeping in touch, reaching out to your own legislator and saying, hey, I'm a small business. I hope that you will turn to me if you have questions about this. Become a resource to a legislator, and that doesn't need to take a lot of time. If you say, I'm a small business, I live in your district, I would love if anytime you see a bill that impacts small business, please come to me and talk to me about it, and I can give you a perspective.
100%, Mary Catherine. I would just echo what you said and just include that right now is actually a really good time to do that. During the legislative session, it is very hectic and sometimes a little bit difficult to get in touch with some of the representatives and senators. But during the legislative interim session, which begins in May, there's opportunities for people to come up to the Hill where they have monthly meetings where they hopefully talk about some of these issues that will come up during the session, and is a good opportunity for folks like small business owners or other people in the community to be able to come up, share their thoughts, talk to legislators in person, or like Mary Catherine said, also just like in general, reaching out to your legislator right now is a really good and perfect time. I also wish we could have, 100% knowledge beforehand about all the bills, but there were almost 1,000 bills this year, and so there are bound to be, issues that someone doesn't necessarily talk about with other folks, and specifically this bill, right? Like there was not a lot of collaboration on this bill with the people that were most impacted. So having voices from people who are impacted and said like, hey, we agree with this issue, or we don't agree, but we weren't part of this conversation, or, this wasn't actually something that people came together around, is really important to share regardless. So yeah, I would just add that.
Thank you so much. Anything else to add, Liliana?
No, I would just echo what has been said and really emphasize finding a group that you trust, right? And doing research into, whether that be Voices for Utah Children or another nonprofit organization or this group, but finding a group that you trust that focuses on the issues that you care about, signing up for their newsletters, following them on Instagram, because we're all really busy. I mean, you're all trying to provide for yourselves, for your families, and it can be hard to keep up. So take advantage of the resources available to you so that you don't feel like you have to learn this all on your own.
Great. Thank you so much for those great advice. So get involved. Don't wait till when the session begins. It starts May when the interim happens, and you can even do it now. Just reach out to your legislature and make sure that you care and that if there is bills, that they notify you. Please go ahead and chat and add more questions you have to the chat. I do have another question. I was really pleased to see that $65 million one-time fund to support school districts with technical education and aligning it with workforce needs. This is something that the New American Task Force works on and cares about dearly. I wonder, we have service providers, New American service providers, as members of this task force. How do they engage with the local districts to make sure that they are aware of the new programmings that is being implemented as a outcome of this great investment to our communities? I know that in speaking with members, oftentimes New Americans might not necessarily know the changes that's happening. And so the ability to make sure that we outreach to the community members, help them understand what are the new programs, how do we make sure that they are being able to access those resources that is now made available. So I would really appreciate any thoughts or recommendations for our service providers who are working in that space.
Z, will you tell me kind of what kind of service providers you're talking about? Because I can think of a couple different ways to engage, but kind of tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking of after-school service providers, individuals, nonprofit organizations who are in the front lines supporting New American communities. Even we have religious institutions too that might not be, a formal organization, but are always doing their best to connect, to make sure that they're connecting those families to resources. And this 65 million one-time investment, I think, is something that is incredible. And I want to make sure that that they are at the table when this resource is being designed and being able to reach the communities.
Well, and what will happen is a school district will likely apply for this grant, and then they will be able to either expand if they already have kind of a catalyst center in their school district, or create one. Hopefully the students are being communicated to about that, hopefully the service providers, but then hopefully the surrounding business community too, because there's a couple different ways. You can have students and service providers inside of a school, but then business community members who partner with them. So there are a couple different ways that can happen. The thing that I would say that when I toured the Davis Catalyst Center about a year ago, the thing that I loved about this, and it was no secret, the principal said, I have to tell you, the students that come to the Catalyst Center are not your straight A students. They are not the kids who are academically off the charts. These are typically B and C students. Which I was actually so happy to hear about that, because there are a lot of students who don't always fit the traditional academic model, sitting, writing, reading, just kind of a lot of those things that we've come to accept as kind of the traditional way to learn. A lot of kids are hands-on learning. So where they might be struggling with the traditional model, they are excelling like crazy in these catalyst centers, and they're excited to go to school. The skills come quite naturally to them. And so it's really great to see another pathway for students to, go to work, to find that pathway for them moving forward. But hopefully, and this is, that when a school receives a grant, they're letting everyone know. You're going to see building going on. You're going to see a new choices. And also, because it's part of the K through 12 system, hopefully they're offering busing. So maybe it's not at your local high school, but you'll be able to take a bus and go to a high school next door, because it hopefully that Catalyst Center will serve multiple schools too, until we potentially have them, more places too. But this should hopefully hit rural Utah, urban Utah, just statewide.
Thank you so much for that extra information. And for small business owners too, and those who are in the call, I think this is also an opportunity for you to think about how you can partner with schools. Amazing. I'm going to do one last call for any other questions. If not, I'm going to just want to thank our speakers again for today's presentation. It's been just really great overview. We are making it so simple for us to understand. I know that is not always the case when you go up to the legislature. So really appreciate for the summary today. Also to want to remind everyone that the monthly webinars are recorded. So we will send the recording out to our members in upcoming. Our next webinar is scheduled for April 22nd. The topic is still to be determined, but we're talking with a few presenters that I think you guys will be really excited about. So look forward to that. We'll be sending out notifications soon. I just want to thank again everyone for joining us today. Thank you for our speakers, and of course for the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity with Claudia and the Utah Center for Global Talent for their partnership with the New American Task Force. Have a great night and a great weekend coming up soon.